Fantasy football isn't won on draft day, not even close. The real difference maker is what happens after the season starts. Trading is your most underrated way to fix your roster and win your league. So today we're going to run through the top 10 players that you need to trade for before it's too late. But if this is your first time here, I'm Joe. I've helped thousands of people just like you win their fantasy leagues over the last decade, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. I start off every video with some urgent fantasy football news, answering some timely Q&A as well. Then we get into today's one key topic, so feel free to skip ahead. But let's get right into it. Let's rip through the news today. Lamar Jackson and that hamstring injury, it looks like he's going to be back in week 9 against the Dolphins. Full participant in practice. So Thursday Night Football, Lamar Jackson wheels up. Also, Jayden Daniels looks like he's going to be returning from that hamstring injury this week, is going to be practicing on Wednesday as well. So nice to see these elite quarterbacks getting back from injury. AJ Brown, it looks like the Eagles are potentially shopping AJ Brown around the trade deadline. Really interesting. We'll see if it ends up happening. The Patriots, obviously Mike Vrabel was his coach in Tennessee, seemed to be one of the teams most aggressively going after him. But AJ Brown, that would definitely be a blockbuster deal at the deadline. Joe Flacco, that shoulder injury, it looks like his week 9 status is up in the air. He's battling through an AC joint sprain. Obviously, we've seen what this offense was able to do with Joe Flacco under center. So if we're back to the Jake Browning experience this week, definitely something that we want to pay attention to with pass catchers. George Pickens, they have not engaged in any contract extension talks. So this is an interesting one just because I think if you're playing in dynasty leagues, this is one that we would love to see get done, obviously. But if it really extends into the offseason, this could be a franchise tag situation or even a tag and trade situation if they can't come to an agreement. George Pickens staying in Dallas would be great for everyone. Rashid Shaheed does seem to be the most likely wide receiver for the Saints to be traded. There's a couple teams that are super interested, the Bills, the Steelers, and the Broncos. So if you do have Rashid Shaheed potentially on your bench in fantasy, I think he gets a decent sized bump if he goes to any of these spots for the rest of the season. So we're hoping that Shaheed does end up getting traded. Isaiah Pacheco, with that knee injury, is now officially week to week with an MCL sprain. Kareem Hunt, Rashad Smith are going to be in bigger roles, obviously, going forward. We'll see. There's really no incentive for Pacheco to get out there before the week 10 bye. So I think week 11, probably the earliest we would get Pacheco back. Tyler Shuck is going to be the starter this week against the Rams. So no more Spencer Rattler for the Saints. And we'll see if Shuck can kind of build on what he did last week. It didn't look great. All right, got some really good questions, so wanted to make sure we made some time for these today. Of course, this time of the year, we're talking through rest of season, guys that we want to be trading for and guys that we think could potentially be league winners down the road. We're also trying to make some of the league dynamics come into play here. If we have a winning team versus a not winning team, are we trying to make the playoffs and get some more starters, or are we trying to build super teams? That's kind of where we're looking at right now. Thoughts on Achan and Flowers for Breece Hall and Emeka Egbuka? Yeah, for me, the first side by a decent margin. I love me some Emeka Egbuka. He's pretty close to the highest player I have rest of season in this trade. Devon Achan is the number 1 player in this deal for me, and then I have Zay Flowers ahead of Breece Hall. So them combined, I think I would prefer Achan and Zay Flowers, but it's a little bit closer than I thought it would be when I first started looking at it. Rank these 3 rest of season: Pittman, Sutton, Flowers. Yeah, my order for this is Flowers, Pittman, and Courtland, Sutton. I have Zay Flowers relatively high. I'm pretty bullish on this Ravens offense in general, taking a pretty big step as they get a little bit more desperate. Sutton and Pittman, I think, is relatively a coin flip, but I have Flowers pretty significantly ahead of those other guys. Bijan for Hurts and Adams. My current QB situation is Bo Nix and Gabriel. Yeah, I'm definitely not going to be trading Bijan just to upgrade at quarterback. I think there's just more things that you can do. With the waiver wire, I'd be sticking with Bo Nix at this point. Devontae Adams is a great piece, but just Adams and Hurts together for Bijan, I'm not doing that deal. Who should I trade Josh Jacobs for? Yeah, so I was kind of looking at this. There's not a whole lot of people that I have above him in my rankings right now. If you wanted to flip him for someone like Derrick Henry, I think I would prefer that. I think James Cook is an interesting conversation to have. We'll say this about Jacobs, though. He definitely saw less touches in the last game. He really hasn't been that efficient this year. He's been scoring touchdowns. We knew that he was going to be one of the more prolific touchdown scorers going into this year, but the efficiency and this calf injury are worrying me a little bit. So I wouldn't fault you for trying to move him for like a Derrick Henry, a James Cook, a Justin Jefferson, something like that. Or if you added a piece trying to get up a tier to like the Saquon Barkley CeeDee Lambs of the world, something like that, Rashee Rice. But you're probably going to have to add a decent piece to get there. But yeah, not giving up on Jacobs by any means, but I do have some red flags a little bit. Should I try and trade Vidal for Chase Brown or try and trade Vidal for Quentin and Waddle? Yeah, I was looking at this one. I had to take like almost like a second look at it, honestly. I think the first one, I would prefer Chase Brown. I think that Flacco, obviously him with that injury is not ideal, but it did kind of bring him back to life a little bit. So I do prefer Chase Brown to Kamani Vidal. We don't know what's going to happen with Amari and Hampton, who's still in a walking boot, as crazy as that sounds. But yeah, Chase Brown rest of the season for me. If you're just looking at Vidal and Quentin Johnston for Jaylen Waddle, I think I still prefer the best player in this deal is Jaylen Waddle. So if you wanted to get out from underneath Kamani Vidal, I think this is a reasonable way to do it. The Quentin Johnston usage is really scary right now. They're kind of just using him on the outside, kind of flushing things for on the outside, just basically getting McConkey more targets underneath. The tight end in general has just basically done a lot more there. So yeah, I'm kind of bearish on Quentin Johnston rest of season. So hopefully that helps. Drake London. What do we got here? Should I trade London and Walker for Flowers and Jaylen Warren? Looking at your running backs, solid wide receivers. I prefer Drake London and Kenneth Walker in this deal. I think that the guy that's the best asset by far is Drake London, so I wouldn't be giving him up for basically coin flips between Walker and Jaylen Warren. Do love Zay Flowers, but I'm not going that far yet. Still prefer Drake London. We get Penix back in there. I think he'll come back to life. Chase Brown for Stefon Diggs full PPR. Yeah, this one's really close. I would say that if the Patriots end up getting someone like AJ Brown, or even they get trade for someone like Rashid Shaheed, like that's going to be a knock on Stefon Diggs and his volume overall. So I have these guys really close in rest of season rankings. But if you wanted to play Chase Brown is undervalued, Stefon Diggs is overvalued, I think that makes some sense. I think I'd prefer Chase Brown in a vacuum, but that one's really close. What's your take on rostering running back handcuffs on your own players versus handcuffing on other injury-prone running backs across the league? Yeah, that's not really how I think about it. The way that I look at it is this player like a next man up that will actually see the majority of the touches? Because there's plenty of situations like, let's use Christian McCaffrey as an example. If you just have Brian Robinson Jr. on your team, even if Christian McCaffrey goes down, Brian Robinson Jr. isn't going to get the Christian McCaffrey role. He's not going to just be handed this same workload, right? You can say that about other guys though, where if they do go down, it's another kind of player that you can kind of slot in. Those are the best ones to absolutely unload on the waiver wire as well. So it's kind of like a next man up situation for me, to where like it needs to be someone that is going to be getting the majority of the touches if they go down. I guess the other part of your question too is, would you rather have like your opponent's next man up or your opponent's handcuffs so that you could basically build a super team if they have injuries? I think that's an interesting situation. This is a time of the year, especially in season long like home leagues, where if I'm super elite at like my wide receiver position and some of my onesie positions, I'll add some of the highest upside next men up. So if you're some of these guys will have like standalone value, right? So if you're looking at someone like Tajay Spears or Samaje Perine, Jordan Mason, Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, those guys, they're going to have a role regardless. Rashad White, something like that. These guys that are like the next man up that actually could have like, basically would walk into like an every down role. The list isn't as high, right? So like Tyler Algier pops to mind as like one of the better handcuffs out there because he can kind of grab the entire role potentially. So I like him quite a bit. I know I've talked about him before, Travion Henderson, but if Ramondre were to go down, I think Travion Henderson with more work could step up. Someone like Kenneth Gainwell, I think is interesting. If Jaylen Warren were to go down, he could take that entire role. Bayshell Tutin backing up Travis Etienne. Those are the type of the guys that I'd be looking at. And I think those are the type of guys that make the most sense to leave on your bench. These ones that would have a massive increase in their role if something happened, and they're not just like the direct backup that's going to only get like the running carries, or not going to get some usage in the receiving game, if that makes sense. If I didn't get to your question, I do answer every question for my members over at the Fantasy Accelerator. It's my full season, year-round fantasy system to win your league. We go through draft season, we go through in-season, we go through off-season, but there's just a lot of really good stuff here, and you get more direct access to me each and every week. Basically, everything that you're seeing on some of the videos, some of these videos is basically expanded upon, and a lot more detail, a lot more value, all of that. I also give away my top 150 rankings for free every single week, so you can put your email in here and get access to that if you're not ready for the membership yet, but I would check it out. There's a link in the description for both of these and appreciate it. Let's get into today's one key topic, 10 players I'd bet my house on in fantasy football rest of season, aka players that I'm trading for aggressively right now in fantasy football. And the first guy that we have to talk about is Bucky Irving. So I think that we had this buy window, right, when he was on the IR. He's been out since week 4, and obviously this team has been just decimated by injuries and this offensive line getting healthier. And at least there's some, I guess, bullishness, I think, in going after a guy like Bucky Irving because their matchups just down the stretch end up looking really strong. And also, we've already seen kind of an RB1 caliber player before his injury, and really the ceiling in general that you're going to get with what he's going to give you in the receiving game. And really this Bucs team just inviting shootouts with a pretty strong offense, but not a great defense so far this year. I think he could be one of those guys in the fantasy playoffs that gives you a huge edge. You get the Falcons, Panthers, and Dolphins in the fantasy playoffs, so you love to see that. And when healthy, this pre-injury role plus the shootout tendency that we get, he could be a PPR running back 1 right away when he gets back. So he's the guy that I'm trading for now at kind of like this discounted playoff hammer, I guess we can call it. And I think that we've already seen the glimpse of it, but the stretch run is really the payoff that you get for a guy like Bucky Irving. So he's the guy I'm aggressively going after. And Rico Dowdle. If you were able to move on from Rico Dowdle, or maybe you're feeling a little bit bad about Rico Dowdle with how much work that Chuba Hubbard was able to get once he came back, I actually think that he makes a decent buy right now because he's been a lot more efficient in general. He's clearly the better back. 5th in rushing yards, only 15th in carries. So really that elite output on limited touches. I think that he could be a guy that just gets unlocked. They've already basically talked about how, and we don't normally see this, but the coach was talking about the usage between both of these guys and how it's hard to go away from a guy that they obviously paid, but who's a really popular player for this fan base. But I mean, there comes a point when you kind of just have to give the ball to your best players. So I think that there's already proof that he can carry a larger load. And I think it's not really like theoretical at this point that he's the better back. And I think if they end up kind of giving him, I guess if the usage starts to tilt towards the better back in this offense, Rico Dowdle, you might actually get a really nice bargain on this player if their guy's a little bit unsure of what it looks like the rest of the year. So I think Rico Dowdle could be a league winner the rest of the way. RJ Harvey, this one's interesting because he has such a unique role. He's basically the premium efficiency player right now. He's been getting a ton of touchdowns, unlimited routes, unlimited touches, all of that. But if this is the type of player that if he really just gains the trust of Sean Payton and starts to get more usage, he's kind of taken over as like the super efficient guy in this backfield. Dobbins has been good, but he has an injury-riddled history, and he's really never played a full season. So if the RB2 is basically the closer at this point anyway, so if RJ Harvey is going to be getting all of those type of looks, I think that this could be a really nice opportunity to trade for someone that could turn touchdowns into basically just more usage across the board, and someone that's clearly explosive, someone that we liked a lot going into the season. So RJ Harvey is a buy for me, even though we're basically living off of efficiency right now, with at least the chance that he ends up getting more volume down the stretch. And obviously this team is going to be in a lot of games, and they're going to be running the ball a ton as well. Ashton Jeanty. We've come full circle on Ashton Jeanty, right? The workhorse volume has been there. We didn't necessarily get the efficiency most of this year. He was a pretty easy trade away target for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago when it became clear that this offense was just not going to be that great of an offense in general. The offensive line, one of the worst in the entire league, all of that. But then there comes a point where if you did want to capture someone for workhorse volume with the talent that he has, the price may be at a point now where you might be able to get him on the cheap. So Ashton Jeanty has come full circle to a buy at this point. And I think that if you can grab him, the schedule after the buy is actually relatively strong. So the post-buy run out for Ashton Jeanty, I think, is really strong for a guy that's still top 10 in opportunity share and carries, with pretty strong yards created and juke rate indicators, as well as I was looking a little bit deeper into this. So I'm trading for Jeanty now, depending on what you can get to get there. But I think that this is like the discounted price. I don't know if it's going to get much more discounted than this just for a workhorse. If we were to take his name and a situation around it and just look at the volume is king at running back. I think you can get Jeanty for a lot cheaper than 3-4 weeks ago. So I'm at least kicking tires there. Let's talk about Josh Jacobs. Obviously, he's the TD engine of this entire team. We went through it a little bit before, right, on Jacobs. I think that there's at least a chance that he ends up being still a touchdown monster, but if his efficiency continues to dip, we start to see a little bit more of the usage go to other players in this backfield, right? So I don't know if the workhorse runner is as clear as some of these other situations. I think he's still like a top 20 guy, but if you did want to trade for him, you have to know that there's at least a little bit of risk here that if he doesn't continue to keep the touchdowns where it's at, it's not great. But the upside of this is if he gets to be a little bit more efficient, which I think he can, he ends up being potentially like a top 10 player the rest of the way. So I can see both sides of it. I still think that the risk is worth it if you were to buy a guy like Josh Jacobs, while people are a little bit nervous on where he's at with this injury, all of those things. That's another thing at this time of the year. If you can get an elite player that has had some efficiency issues, but has clearly had some sort of injury that he's been battling through, if they get through the bye, if he actually ends up getting healthy, you might get him basically at full strength going to the fantasy playoffs. And then we start to see the volume and the efficiency meet. And it's really one of those situations where he could be a league winner down the stretch. I mean, we could all see it. The Josh Jacobs 3-touchdown game gets you into your fantasy championship. I think it's very realistic and a guy that I'd be actively trading for. Let's talk about wide receivers. Emeka Egbuka. Before we do that, recapping the running backs that I'd be trading for right now: Josh Jacobs, Ashton, Jeanty, RJ Harvey, Rico, Dowdle, and Bucky, Irving. Guys that I'd be betting my house on the rest of the way. Emeka Egbuka. So this is kind of a little bit of a buy low window, in my opinion. 9 targets, but just 3 for 35 in week 8. So we had the usage, but we didn't get the points. 2 week 8 end zone looks as well. 1 deep 34-yard catch that grazed off his hands as well. So we know we're going to get the touchdown chances here. Week 7, he led the team with 12 targets. Baker repeatedly missed him in that game as well. So we have basically 2 games, back-to-back games, where we haven't had a lot of efficiency, but we've still had the opportunity. So I think he's kind of like a little bit of a hidden gem if you have an owner that doesn't value him where he should be, essentially. Like, he is legitimately a top 15, top 10 wide receiver the rest of the way in this offense. And if there's a guy in your league that is not valuing him in that way, he's someone that would be aggressively trying to go get. You're going to get strong offense. This defense has really just promoted a lot of shootouts. And I think in general, attaching yourself to Baker Mayfield in the fantasy playoffs is something that I'd want to do. Obviously, they get Atlanta, Miami, and Carolina, like I mentioned with Bucky. So I'm buying Tampa Bay skill position players with the injuries that they have. If they get a little bit healthier on the offensive line, this could be a home run. I think this might be your last shot, essentially, to trade for Egbuka at where his price is right now, and a little bit of extra leverage is that they're on bye in week 9. So trading for guys that are on bye for teams that need wins, also a great thing to do this time of the year. Courtland, Sutton. So we mentioned RJ Harvey, but Denver has been absolutely erupting, and Sutton is really like the most established player in this wide receiver room. Obviously, Troy Franklin kind of took over last week, but there's really no indication that Sutton is going to be the guy that doesn't lead the way the rest of the way. A couple couple kind of brutal games in the box score, and he also had a touchdown wiped away by an offensive pass interference, so that would have been a little bit different as well. I still think that this is like a bullish signal. He went 6 for 67 against the defense that allowed the fewest wide receiver fantasy points per game. So I do like that quite a bit. I still think he's the alpha in this offense when it really matters in the high leverage moments. And I think that he's one of those guys that Bo Nix is going to continue to chuck a lot of air yards to. And obviously the touchdown upside is there. So I think anytime you can grab a guy like this on a pretty elite offense and get him in like a nice buy low moment, he's someone that down the stretch could make a big impact for your team. McConkey, yeah, I talked a little bit about Quentin Johnston and how I'm a little bit bearish on how he's being used. It's kind of like he's being used to clear out these routes for a guy like McConkey underneath, and obviously the tight ends in for the Chargers. So this is a situation where I think the volume has been pretty real. There's been some big plays, but 15 targets in week 7. I do think that we're fully back on McConkey. The efficiency is starting to look a little bit better. Scored a nice touchdown last week. So I think the breakout's already started for McConkey. If you can trade for him before the box score fully catches up, and when people realize that Quentin Johnston is probably back to being the wide receiver 2 in this offense, I think McConkey is the guy that I want in this stretch run. A.J. Brown. If he gets traded, if he doesn't get traded, he's still a guy that I think could win your league for you. The superstar type of talent. I guess the narrative is a little bit misleading, I think, that he's in like a little bit of a down year. First read target share, he's number 1 in that through the first 6 weeks, despite kind of what people have been saying about him. The volatility is definitely going to be there with what the Eagles do or what they don't do in the passing game each week. But I mean, they basically just started winning games again, back-to-back weeks, and the offense has really just given Hurts a little bit more opportunity to throw as well. So that's nice. Obviously, the injury, the ceiling is what still gets me, and the efficiency is what gets me with AJ Brown. That explosion against Minnesota, I think the context in general explains a little bit of what the dip has been from like a volume standpoint, but the talent is still absolutely there. So my thought is like, what if this bye just kind of resets him a little bit? They see what's been working, what's not been working, and they come back after this bye with basically playoffs on the line, and they really need to just use him a lot more effectively than they have before. And then you're sitting on a top 5 wide receiver the rest of the way. I would not be shocked. Zay Flowers. Buy all your Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers is not the one that has benefited so far, but getting Lamar back this week, I think this one will look pretty good as early as this week on Thursday. I think the alpha volume that you get, even with kind of like the backup quarterbacks, is encouraging. He's been leaving a ton of points on the field. Huntley flat out missed him deep in week 8, which was brutal. Lamar makes that throw. And then I think it really sets up for a nice spike this week against Miami. And I think he's probably has one of the most favorable wide receiver schedules the rest of the way. This is the trade window, though, if you can try and grab him as quickly as possible. We've been talking about grabbing him and Henry for a couple weeks now. That obviously worked out with Henry getting in the end zone a couple times last week. But when Lamar is back, the targets are going to basically stay the same or be elevated, and you're not going to be able to get him for this type of discount for much longer. That's it for today. Drop your trade questions below. I try and answer every single one, and also hit subscribe because I'm bringing back the touchdown video this week where we go through game by game of week 9, and I'm going to tell you who's the most likely to score and a flyer as well in each game. We'll see you soon.